In this lesson, I'm going to teach you a few of the tips and tricks that I have to make life easier. Now, as you've seen, I don't use a lot of plugins and add-ins and all the rest of those tools. I have nothing against them. In fact, I do use them in my day job development. But when it comes to showing a video or showing you how to do something, I don't want to confuse you with a lot of extra add-ins. But there are a few things you can do to make life a whole lot easier for yourself that are free. And so I'm going to show you some of those. So let's go over to SSMS and get right started. All right. So in here, let's open up a timesheets database. And we'll do a new query. Make sure it's timesheets. And if I want to look up the information in dbo.customers, I do select star from dbo.customers. And I run that. Well, there's actually an easier way of doing this. If you go to Tools, go to Options, Keyboard, Query Shortcuts. In the Control 3, or whatever you choose, but I do Control 3, type select top 1000 star from. So just like when we right click on the table and say select top 1000 from, this is doing the same exact thing. So if I hit OK, and then I open a new window, because you have to open new windows after you change those options. If I have employees, just that word, and I highlight it and say Control 3, now it gives me all of the rows from employees. If I type customers, highlight it, and say Control 3, there's all the records for customers. Again, top 1000 records. I could have said right click, select top 1000 records. It'll do the same kind of thing, but creates this new script for me. This way, it just does it for me really quick. So that's a great way, especially if you have a more complex statement. Let's just grab one of these views here. The locations per customer. If we design this and grab this select, just so we have something to work with, I paste this in here, and you're looking at this as a developer that's new to this database. You've never seen it before, and you're like, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. We could say, well, what's in customers? Control 3. There we go. What's in locations? Control 3. There's locations. Okay, real quick, real easy, and it makes just those quick what the columns are, or what's the data look like. It makes those lookups really easy. And because we said select top 1000 star from, it also prevents us from pulling up a million rows in our view when we just want to see a little bit of information. So that's a protection feature there too that actually makes it a little better than me just typing select star from, because I usually forget to say select top 1000 star from. I say select star from. So that's a really quick little tip. Now I've got one that's a little bit bigger, and it's a little more, it could be scary if you aren't walked through it. So let me show you. I actually have this script here. I'm going to open this up. Now this is something I created with, it's basically cobbled together from a lot of other people's works. So I'm definitely not taking credit for this whole thing. In fact, I'm not taking credit for most of it. I did rework a lot of it, but it really is the work of some very smart people. So it is 251 lines of SQL text. And it gets some complex stuff there, okay? But don't worry, you don't have to know what any of this really does. You don't have to understand it. all you need to do is make sure that you are in the master database and then say run, because notice create procedure. So if we execute this, we've now created this SP underscore. Remember I said don't do SP underscore because Microsoft will think it's one of their store procedures? Well, now I'm tricking the system into thinking that this is a Microsoft store procedure when it's not. It's my store procedure. And I put it in the master database. The reason why is because if the system cannot find this store procedure in the database you're in, say timesheets, it will fall back to looking for it in the master database. So since we stored it in the master database, it's always accessible from any database on the server. Now I'm going to copy the name, close this out, go back to my tools window, go to options, keyboard, query shortcuts, and Control-4, I'm going to paste in that name. Just the name, nothing else. And hit OK. Now when I open a new query window, and let's type employees. Maybe you said employee. You're like, I think it's called employee. If I hit Control-4, check this out. Down here it says schema name, DBO, item name, employees, and it's a base table. And the full name is dbo.employees. So I was searching for, I think it's called employee, and it said, yep, I found one entry. It's a table, and there's the full name. It's actually employees. So this right here, Control-4 now, is a really powerful search. Let's search for work. Just highlight work, hit Control-4. It found two entries that have work in them. One is a view, one is a table. There's the view name, there's the table name. Now, in a database where you have 5 tables, 2 views, and 2 store procedures, that's not a big deal. But in a database where you have 1,000 store procedures, that's a big deal. Okay? But it gets even better. What if we said work done? Since this is an actual table name, when I hit Control-4, it doesn't do a search. It says, here's all of the columns in that table. Here's their position, if they have a null or not for the default value, or something else. So their default value is get date for create date and last updated. If they're nullable, and their data type, including the number of characters in a varchar field. It also says here's the constraints. There's the foreign keys and the primary key. And there's the index, which is the primary key, and it's a clustered index. So all of that is great information about that table. Again, if we were to take this, let's grab this statement again. If you're looking at this statement and go, well, what's all this information? What does this table look like? Or how does this work? You could say, okay, customer, Control-4. There's all the columns I have and what the data types are. That's really helpful for when you're developing a store procedure and need to know what to pass in for the data type. Is it a varchar 100 or a varchar 20 or a varchar 50? Okay, that would show you. So that's a really powerful lookup tool. It's free. I will attach this to the course itself so you can download it and put it into your own databases. All right, so that's the lookups. We have Control-3 now, which would give us data from this table. Control-4 is a lookup which either gives us the table information, or if we search for just a part of a table name or a name in general, it'll give us all the values that match that wildcard right there. Now let's move on to our next tip. We've created tables using the right-click New Table method. We created views using the right-click New View. And we created new store procedures using the right-click New Procedure, Store Procedure. But sometimes you want to move your objects from one database to another. For example, I do this when I move from my development database to a production database or to a team development database. And one way of doing that is to have a script. A script is where you have just the SQL text and you run that and it creates the object. For example, the new store procedure actually creates a script. Now you could save that script and run it again somewhere else. But for views and tables, we didn't do it that way. So how do we get a script for this? Well, if you right-click on customers and say script table as create to new query window and wait for it, there is the script for creating the customers table. So we have the create statement, which gives us all the columns, their types, and their limiters, like 20 characters or 100, and whether or not they can be null. The primary key clustered index based upon the ID, and then here's those two links between fields. Nope, I'm sorry, that's the constraint. So the constraint is, it's saying the get date is run by default for this column, create date, and the same for last updated. So with almost any object inside of SQL Server, we can script it if it already exists by right-clicking on it, saying script table as, or right-clicking on it and saying script view as create to new window. It gets even better for tables. And it's also a quick way to understand how to script something. So if you're going to try and write a script and you weren't sure what it looks like to have a date time in a table, or a constraint for setting the default value for get date, right-click on a table that has one, say script table as create to new window, and look at it and say, oh, there's the alter table statement for the constraint of a default get date. So that's really powerful as well. And the final thing I want to show you is the database diagram. And it says, this database does not have one or more supported objects required to use database diagramming. Do you want to create them? Why, sure you do. And now we can say new database diagram. if we select all of our tables, hit Add, and then hit Close, what this does is it shows us all the relationships we have in our database. So we can see how all the different tables relate to each other. This is a great way to understand a table or database if you're coming into it for the first time. Create a new database diagram. Either throw all the tables there or throw a few tables in there and just get a subset of the database as a whole. Notice that this looks a lot like the view, where we did the view editor, and it had a similar connection there with the key and the infinity symbol and all the rest. It's basically the same thing. The other nice thing is you can actually print this out. When I had a job where I had to build a very, very complex SQL database and then create the front end that connected to it, I actually created a database diagram for it and printed it out and had it in above my desk so I could look at it and see how the relationships worked, because I'd often forget where does that connect to and what do I need to make sure I look out for. So I move these things around so I can see very easily where things connect to. And then I go, okay, customers links to locations. And that link would be on the, and I'd say, okay, customer ID right there. That links to customer. Okay, and that primary key tells me that this one is just the ID, where this one would be the, location ID, the foreign key. So the database diagram, kind of fun, but also very, very useful for understanding your database and for keeping track of those relationships. Also, if you don't see lines when you think you should, that means you missed a table when you went through and added those relationships. This is just a visualization of the relationships you're creating. So those are some of my tips and tricks. There's plenty more that you could learn and discover, and there's probably plenty more I could share as well. But those are the ones that I find myself using a lot. This one, especially if I'm learning a database. The others, like the lookups and the quick select star from, those I use on a daily basis to make sure I know what columns are there, what the column types are, or what the data looks like, and so on and so forth. So I hope you find those useful. Go ahead and run the practice and make sure you can do these things in your own database, and then we'll jump into the last lesson.